Good morning, Buradar, and welcome to the Petitions Committee. There are no apologies or substitutions this morning, and the first item on the agenda is the second item on the agenda is new petitions. I understand we have 4 new petitions before us this morning. The first petition is Fair Deal for Supply Teachers. This petition was submitted by Sheila Jones, having collected 997 signatures. An initial response to the petition was received from the Cabinet Secretary for Education on the 6th of March. Do you have any comments they'd like to make?
I'm pleased we have this in front of us. I feel quite strongly that we have a culture of agency staffing that is actually quite harmful to workers across a range of public services. Teaching in this case, it's a very live issue. In my brief in health, I look a lot at the impact of increased use of agency working in delivery of doctors and nurses. I think it needs to be addressed. Yes. So I think that should be our starting point. I'm really interested in whether the Education Committee has given consideration to looking at this as an issue, because I know some of the members of that committee are certainly interested in pursuing this, but I genuinely don't know if that's something that's been considered by them.
The Education Committee of the 4th Assembly did an inquiry into supply teaching, I think in 2015. We're not aware of anything that's happening in this Assembly.
Okay.
I think it's important to note, as you say, Freen, now 50% of supply teachers are employed in this way, and the numbers seem to be increasing. So,
an interest. I have worked on supply, and then when I went on the books, I think I can't recall from memory now. I trebled my income by being on the books rather than on supply. It's almost legalised theft, really, because the agencies are just creaming off such a high percentage. Yeah, exactly. It'd be great to get new directions in. I'd love to have a chat with them. And be able to question them about this matter, because there's millions of pounds leaking out of the Welsh education system needlessly. It's a real, it's a real scandal, to be honest. And they're based in London as well, aren't they?
I don't care less where they're based. I mean, if they're taking millions of pounds out and they are taking money out of people's pockets, they could be based in Cardiff, they could be based in Swansea. I still wouldn't like it. I don't dislike it because they're in London. I dislike it because of what they're doing. The point I was going to say, I know what the supply teachers want is to be directly employed by the LEA. So we could write to them and get that reply from them. But direct employment from the LEA is the old system, in inverted commas, which existed, and it's one which supply teachers would get a far better deal. I don't like the system of agency staff. I don't like the system of agency staff anywhere. I've said that on numerous occasions in speeches I've made and things I've written about exploitative contracts, and agency working is one of those exploitative contracts that exists. I think I've got no problem with writing to them asking what they want, but I think the answer I can second guess the answer we're going to get back is we would like to be directly employed by local education authorities, and that's what I would like to see happen.
Well, obviously the local education authorities have failed to get the numbers there in order to supply these agency teachers themselves. Now that makes you wonder why that is the case.
It isn't the case. The reason is a man called Ewan Richards, who was a councillor and Plaid Cymru, became an independent, fought a legal case against local authorities over what they were paying supply teachers, which is substantially more than they get paid at the moment, saying they ought to be given increments every year and they shouldn't be paid on a spot point. He won that case. Local authorities then stopped employing directly. If you let local authorities apply at a spot point for supply teachers, and make sure they have to give them training, etc. It'll improve the quality of supply teachers, and it will mean increase the amount of money in people's pockets. I mean, what he achieved with the highly Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, I mean, personally, and I do disagree with you that it matters that it doesn't matter that the company's based in London, because it's public money that's leaving Wales. I mean, I think that there's an alternative way forward, which is to set up an agency which doesn't exist to make a profit and which is fair towards the workers. I certainly favour that in supplying staff in the health service. But it would be interesting to know from them, you know, which they would favour, what is the model, and
but I think Reen and I have got specific political difference. I don't want workers to be exploited at all. Reen doesn't seem to very much if they get exploited, as long as it's by someone in Wales.
No, not at all. The idea of having an agency which is set up not to make profit is to make sure that they are paid fairly, that they're not exploited. That's the point.
Yes,
an agency set up not to make profit. I tell you what, there's all sorts of tricks you can carry out on a non-profit making organisation of payment to your staff, payment for goods and services within inside the organisation, which can leak out money from it. I think the right answer is the local education to appoint people on spot points and then let them be paid properly and directly. But let's go back and see what they say.
That's not about this. Yeah. No. It's not about where Mike and I stand.
I think, the possible actions are, in light of the range of the issues and concerns raised by the petition, the committee could ask the petitioners whether there are any specific solutions to the issues raised that they would like the committee to explore in taking consideration of the petition forward.
Yes, happy with that.
Are we happy with that?
As a starting point?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Start of the process.
Okay, we'll move on to the next petition, new petition, which is Welsh should not be compulsory for children with dyslexia and special needs. This petition was submitted by Jessica Fox, having collected 81 signatures. I will say that this has some alignment to the fact of the teaching of Welsh generally, and we've had petitions with regard to that. So we have had some information in the past with regard to this sort of issue. We had initial response to the petition was received from the Minister for Welsh Language and Lifelong Learning on the 18th of April. The Minister stated the importance of the study of the Welsh language and that this will continue under the new curriculum that is currently in development. And the Government is committed to create an inclusive education system for all learners, and the Minister stated that local authorities have a duty to provide suitable education for all learners.
2 points I'd like to make. It would be a much better petition, of course, if it said that if Welsh were the first language, children wouldn't have to learn English. But if they won't say that, will they? So I think that the Minister's gone as far as we could expect, and I'm happy with the Minister's reply.
I did a bit of research. British Dyslexia Association, for example, actively encourages learning another language. The question at the core of this, as far as I'm concerned, is how a language is learnt. I can understand the concern of a parent who believes that there's a barrier in front of their child, and of course in extraordinary conditions and situations, you know, various decisions can be taken about how a child is educated. But I wouldn't want a child with dyslexia to be disadvantaged or disenfranchised from bilingualism, seeing as the mechanisms are in place. But I think we need to perhaps understand the level of support available in the teaching of Welsh to pupils with dyslexia, and what happens in extreme cases where it is identified that somebody who has Welsh as a first language is deeply struggling with learning English, or vice versa, as is highlighted here. You know, we can certainly ask the petitioner for a reaction to the response, first of all, from the Minister.
Speaking as a former languages teacher, really, as Sreen said, there is a huge benefit in learning more than one language, and it's a very old-fashioned attitude that children should only learn one. And so I think really, I'd maybe write back to the parents and see what she thinks, but I agree with Michael. I don't think there's much more we can do, really, because, obviously she has an opinion, but I'd say it's misplaced, really. Again, it's just playing into the anti-Welsh language narrative, in my opinion.
Yeah, fine. I think it also raises the question of equality of opportunity with regard to learning the Welsh language, and I'd be very worried about distinguishing between different people's abilities to learn the language and not getting that language offered exactly the same as everybody else.
Very quickly, I remember teaching one lad. He really struggled writing. He was brilliant orally. You know, unfortunately, he had to stop doing the language in year 9. But then when he left school, he went on to be a salesperson, and he's made loads of money. Yes, but it's a shame he didn't have the opportunity to learn more languages. He would have done easily.
Is there information that can be gathered for the petitioner on, former research that's being carried out into how to address the needs of pupils with dyslexia when they're taking on the task of learning another language, or that kind of thing?
Right. Yeah.
I can ask colleagues in the research service whether there are publications they're aware of or advice, information.
Yeah, it'd be useful.
Okay, so the possible actions on this is the committee could agree to await the views of the petitioner on the response from the Minister for Welsh Language and Lifelong Learning before deciding whether to take any further action on the petition. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. The next new petition is proposed new fishing bylaws and failings of NRW. The petition was submitted by Sean Godbert, having collected 1,070 signatures.
And are we tying this in with the next petition as well?
Well, I think at the next opportunity we would, but I think we'll keep them as two separate items at this moment in time. But they are, of course, closely linked, as you say. One part that I did note is that the NRW executives at the board meeting openly accepted that they failed to effectively communicate and adopt a policy of implementing agreements with stakeholders, which is rather a stark admission, to be quite honest.
Is it a surprise?
Okay, well, the background is that we received a response from the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Planning and Rural Affairs on the 26th of March. I think the possible actions at this point is the next petition to be considered also considers the impact of the same decision. Therefore, the committee may wish to agree to group them for consideration in the future. And the committee could agree to await the views of the petitioner on response from the Cabinet Secretary before deciding whether to take any further action on the petition. Are we happy to group these two matters together? Yes?
Yeah.
Fine. The second possible action, the committee could agree to await the views. Are we happy with that?
Yeah, I think what's important to note here is that a decision was made last week, which gives us a little bit of time. We've got time now to go back to the petitioner on that.
That's right, yeah. The second petition, which is closely aligned, is give Welsh fishing clubs and salmon and sea trout a chance. The petition was submitted by Reuben Woodford. I hope I've said that name correctly, having collected 1,710 signatures. There was a response from the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Planning and Rural Affairs on the 23rd of March. This petition asks that the NRW actually reverses its 10-year period of zero kill, and it gives a few alternatives to that in order to protect the fishing species in the rivers. So if we are grouping this, so the committee could write to the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Planning and Rural Affairs to provide the detailed comments from the petitioners and to ask for an update on the consideration of NRW's application for the determination of bylaws. This would also answer many of the questions raised in the previous committee, the previous petition. Are you happy that we should carry on?
I mean, I've been involved with some campaigners in my constituency. It's clear to me that something has gone wrong here in terms of both what's raised by the first petitioner regarding the decision-making process,
yes,
and also in general in terms of the relationship between NRW and
yes,
the fishermen, who I see as more than mere stakeholders. I see them as joint custodians of the rivers with a number of other bodies. And I'm no expert, but it strikes me that the fishing community is putting forward a set of proposals which have ultimately the same aim as Natural Resources Wales, because it's in their interests to bolster fish stock, for example. So, you know, I would like us to see if we can use the next 12 months, which at the moment is, to use their words, a stay of execution, as a means to try to influence a little bit of a change, including a review of how the decision was made in the first place.
Yeah, and I think it's true to say that the fishing fraternity are very much involved in conservation of our rivers, and they do initiate a number of initiatives in order to protect the environment of particularly with regard to spawning grounds, etc. So are we happy that that's the... Yes? Okay. Thank you. The next new petition is Stop User Worker Certification on Welsh Government Projects. Petition was submitted by Paul Fear, having collected 66 signatures. I think the petitioner is quite succinct in putting together the number of items that he wanted to raise, and being explicit about why he believes the imposition of this certificate is contrary to the workers' rights, basically.
It's just another tax. I see this as more bureaucracy, making workers sign up for courses they don't really need to do and pay through the nose for. So the training companies make a fortune again.
We did have a response from the Cabinet Secretary for Finance on the 10th of April. And I believe I'm right in saying that the petitioner commented on those. Yes, that's right. I think what the petitioner, the whole idea of this petition is that these are administered not by government. They are institutions that administer them, albeit that they are institutions very closely aligned with the building trade. But his contention is that they can be quite arbitrary in their application. And obviously the costs to anyone who falls outside the certain umbrellas of employment are quite considerable.
We write to the Cabinet Secretary with his comment, to ask him to reply to those comments. I think we also need to know what the insurers' view on this is. I mean, if the insurers are saying we are going to add substantial amounts to the insurance on the job if people haven't got these cards, what it's going to do is depress wages on the job. So they save on the card, but they end up losing money on their weekly income. So this could be another one of these Pyrrhic victories that people achieve from time to time. So I think we need to find out if the insurance companies have a view on whether these cards are helpful or not, and what they would do without them.
Fine. Yeah. And the other possible action is the committee could write to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance to seek a response to the detailed comments provided by the petitioner and the alternative approach proposed.
I think we can facilitate a debate initially between the petitioner and the Cabinet Secretary. That's a useful role for us to play.
Yes.
Okay. And would you like me to explore, I'm not sure the mechanism, who we would write to at this stage, but I could look into how we would get an insurance
Ask the
industry
Cabinet
review.
Secretary. They've got a government full of people who can tell them whether it has any effect on insurance costs, which would then have an effect on either contract costs, which it probably wouldn't, but on the only thing that could be depressed in a contract, which is the wages.
Okay. That's the government in the first
Yes,
instance.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Fine. Can we now move on to updates to previous petitions? And the first of these is to reopen Carno Station. This petition was submitted by Carno Station Action Group and was first considered by the committee in October 2017, having collected 877 signatures. I think that we ought to point out that this follows on from the initial petition by Carno Station Action Group, which was some time ago, I believe back in 2013, is it?
I think it may have closed then. It was started.
It was closed, that's right. And then this is resubmitted because of comments by the Secretary of State with regard to stations and the fact that they were being put on the station list. Okay, the committee last considered the petition on the 9th of January 2018 and a response was received from the petitions on the 19th of April. And the petitioners have suggested the EIS committee should examine the new stations funding issue. Do you have any comments regarding this?
Question I've got. I thought it was on the list that was going forward.
There's a long list which may or may not have become a short list. So no Llangefni's on it.
Yeah, I know Lando's on it. We can, but that was going to then go to stage 2. But Carno was on stage 1, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So we could ask on behalf of this, but I think something all of us would like to know: when are the numbers going to be reduced? And will Carno be on? Is Carno on the reduced list? The shorter list.
Okay. Yeah. No, my understanding is they're going through that process. I think Carno had made it through to the second stage. The points that the petitioners for this are making now is that that process is developing business cases, but would still ultimately require UK government or Network Rail funding to happen, and that previously the Welsh Government has directly funded the development of some stations. And they're querying that apparent change of policy.
Yeah. I'd be grateful to have as much information as we can as well. Really.
Yeah. So our possible action is that the committee could write to the Cabinet Secretary of Economy and Transport to share the petitioner's comments and ask when and for what reasons the Welsh Government has apparently revised its policy in relation to funding new stations. And the committee could also write to the Economy, Infrastructure and Skills Committee to ask whether it has any intention to look at the issue of Welsh Government funding for new station development in Wales, or if it would consider allocating time to do so, as requested by the petitioners. Now, as a member of the EIS committee, I don't think there's anything on the agenda at this moment in time, but we could.
Is there anything on rail? Because presumably the committee will have to look at the change to the new franchise at some point, and maybe it could be included as...
Yes, but there's no specific, I don't think there's a specific part of the agenda that asks for this, so we could ask for that with the EIS. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. The next one was close the gap for deaf pupils in Wales. The petition was submitted by the National Deaf Children's Society and was first considered in May 2013. The committee last considered the petition on the 11th of July 2017 and agreed to suggest the NDCS contacts the Minister's Diary Secretary to arrange a direct meeting and ask them to report back to the committee following that meeting. The petitioner has submitted further comments on the 3rd of April. Then the committee have any comments on?
We'll wait for the petition to come back to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had a positive impact, or the role of the committee has already been positive,
Yes.
in that meeting took place between NDCS and the Cabinet Secretary, and that they think it was positive. I think that's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, there is the option that in view of the fact that there is ongoing dialogue between the petitioners and the Welsh Government, the length of time this petition has been undertaken, which we noticed from 2013, and the unclear timescales for actions discussed by NDCS and the Cabinet Secretary, the committee could agree to close the petition at this point.
I'd like to keep it open, really. I think as the petitioner,
It's
not.
It should be noted that that would allow a new petition to be submitted in the future if sufficient progress is not made. It gives that option. If we keep it open, it doesn't allow that option.
Keep it open, but
Yeah. We let the petitioner come back to us, and if they're happy, we close it when the petitioner is happy that they've made progress.
Yeah.
Yes?
They could even be of the opinion that now is the time to close the petition themselves, so they can resubmit. But our watching brief at this point would have to be fairly loose, because there's a conversation going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if they came back to us and said, this hasn't worked, the minister's not been prepared to engage with us, then I, for one, would like to get the minister and them in for an evidence session. So I want to keep that evidence session possibility available.
yeah.
Fine. Okay. Now, because they're closely linked, we followed the following two items are grouped for consideration. First is remove the obligation on schools to hold acts of religious worship. This was submitted by Rhiannon Shipton and Lily McAllister Sutton, and was first considered in June 2017, having collected 1,333 signatures. The second petition was keeping current guidelines for religious assemblies. The petition was submitted by Iraj Irvan and was first considered by the committee in June 2017, having collected a total of 2,231 signatures. The committee last considered the petitions on the 13th of March and agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Education to request further details about the ongoing consideration of issues around human rights with regard to this, and a response received from the Cabinet Secretary on the 11th of April. Quite complicated, obviously, the situation with regard to this, that and the following the comments by the Cabinet Secretary. Possible actions, yes. Do you have any comments to make on that?
Sympathy for the original petitioners, who I recall were young, and I think it's quite poor that after 10 months we're not able to give them a response. I think it's not good enough, really. It shouldn't take 10 months to get a legal opinion.
Are you happy to? Just welcome. Yes.
I find this,
I just take a moment to welcome Susie Davis to the committee. She's obviously standing in for Janet Finch-Saunders.
Yes, many apologies. Big crash on the M4, so I did leave in plenty of time. Thanks.
That's fine. Okay, so we are deliberating on some of the petitions that are before us. I think we already talked about particular ones, so perhaps you'll come in on the next petition if you feel happy to do that.
There are two petitions. One said it should stop.
Yeah, that's right. I saw it last night.
And the other one said we should carry them on.
Yeah.
Can I ask, as a point of information, I'm sorry to land this on you, how many examples, or what kinds of examples have we had in the past where we have two concurrent petitions arguing the complete opposite?
Yes.
Because what it tells me is that what we have is a live debate where we have strong opinions on both sides, and I guess what we have to consider is whether this committee is the forum in which to try to settle that debate. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
what examples have there been?
It has happened. It's not particularly common. It tends to happen on certain types of issues, I would reflect. We've had a similar situation that carried over, I think, from the 4th Assembly into the 5th. That was about charitable chaplaincy, which I suppose has a similar basis for it. And we had an opposing petition was submitted after the first one that time. It has occasionally happened on environmental issues as well.
And how has the committee approached those issues?
Tended to consider them side by side like this, so whilst they're calling for the complete opposite of each other, they relate to the same issues. So the committee has in the past tended to consider them alongside each other, but the question as to what work the committee has done on that issue to facilitate that debate, I think would depend upon the issue and whether the committee wanted to allocate the time to do that. That different approaches have been taken.
Could I make a suggestion then? Within the year, our youth parliament will be set up, and it strikes me as something that might want to be considered there, as it's as could be young people who are affected, so they may as well make the decision.
Yeah, I think that, coming back to Fionn's point, I think the fact of the matter is that these are both related to each other in that the answer that must come back from the Cabinet Secretary would impact on either or of these two petitions. So.
You know, whichever point of view anyone has isn't relevant to me. What is relevant is you've got young people especially engaging in the democratic process, and the Minister or Cabinet Secretary is unable to give any clear guidelines, really, and any legal view. And I think it's a really bad precedent that we've got youngsters using the Petitions Committee, getting a hell of a petition together, and then the Cabinet Secretary is unable to make any progress. You know, whichever side of the argument you're on, I'm not entering into that debate. I was educated as a Catholic, you know, actually, but I just think they've gone to the trouble of putting this petition in, and they deserve an answer, really. I'd like to write to the Minister to say, you know, come on, this really isn't good enough. 10 months waiting.
Well,
on that point, I mean, this is something that the Secretary is acknowledging requires an answer or a set of answers, and has said that her officials are working on it. That is unlikely to satisfy petitioners, quite rightly, not going to satisfy them. You know, at the very least, perhaps we could get a firmer timescale from the Cabinet Secretary. Whether she sees this as being inherently tied in with the development of the curriculum, I don't think it is. Or, you know, but by when or in what context is she trying to reach a resolution to this?
Yeah.
Or maybe she's honest and saying she's not really fussed.
Well, the possible actions of the committee could await a further update from the Cabinet Secretary, but given the caveat that's just been brought in by Freen, that we have a time schedule for that, I think that's probably the best option at this moment.
Members want to write back again and ask whether we can get that clearer time scale.
I think they should show more respect for both sets of petitioners, really. I think I appreciate that things do take time, but 10 months?
Yeah. Or be honest and say, sorry, this isn't something we want to deal with.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, maybe ask what evidence she's adduced in the meantime.
Well, that's right.
I
mean, given the uncertainty around the timescales for receiving substantive response from the Welsh Government, the committee could agree to carry out its own evidence gathering on the issue in the meantime through inviting either written or oral evidence. Are we happy to do that?
Yeah.
In terms of the timescales around that, the committee's forward work programme, based upon decisions members have made at recent meetings, is taken up until the summer recess. We wouldn't be looking to do anything specifically if it involved evidence sessions on this until the autumn, I don't think. One other thing to mention, the committee has been contacted in the past, and we published a letter, but this goes back several months now, from an academic at Bangor University who has published research on this topic. So there is Welsh-specific research that's been undertaken. I believe that's now a book that's published. So there are other sources by which the committee could look to get a view. That may be something you want to consider. Or in the first instance, the committee writes back to the Cabinet Secretary and asks for that further detail on timescales.
I think we can do that. I'm wary of taking on work in this committee because I'm not entirely convinced that this committee is the forum to do it. I think both sides have got very, very strong and very, very valid arguments. There's a case of an irresistible force and an immovable object here, and yes. It would no doubt be a fascinating discussion. I'm not sure where it would go. That's all. Yeah,
whether it resolve the issue. That's what you say. Really. Yeah. Okay. So are we happy to carry on with at least gathering evidence? Yeah. Is that what we're happy to do?
Right to the Cabinet Secretary to ask for the timescale.
Yeah. Okay, can we move on, because I'm mindful of the time that we have. Ensuring the equality of curriculum for Welsh medium schools, e.g. GCSE in psychology. The petition was submitted by Chris Evans and was first considered by the committee in November 2017, having collected 652 signatures. The committee last considered the petition on the 7th of September 2017 and agreed to await the views of the petitioner on responses received from the Welsh Government and Qualifications Wales before considering further action on the petition. At this point, we would like to point out that the clerk has emailed the petitioner on a number of occasions, contacted him by phone in the last week. He indicated that he would provide comments to the committee, but had not done so before the papers for this committee were published.
Shall we wait then, give him another 2 weeks to send the comments?
It's not an example where a petition has ceased communicating with us. It's just maybe there's a reason why that this evidence hasn't got to us, or the comments haven't got to us. But I think this is a really important issue. And it's very easy for people in this kind of circumstance to say, well, forget it then. I'm not going to win, but this is an important point of principle in which it's returned to it.
Okay, so the actions that proposed then is the committee could agree to give the petitioner further opportunity to provide his comments in response to correspondence receives, but we will consider closing the petition at the next meeting if this is not forthcoming. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we tell him that we are eager to continue looking at this.
Okay. Yes, indicate that.
It sadly reinforces points that were made during the introduction of the legislation that introduced Qualifications Wales as well. Kind of, they were warned this was going to happen.
Where is the lack of support that means examination bodies from England will not in any way entertain the idea of putting forward Welsh assessments? I'm sure there's a level of support that can be put forward by government.
Or in fact the WJEC itself, because they were seen as acquiring a closed market on this effectively. So where are they?
We have to move on. The protecting the class sizes in design and technology classrooms and workshops. The petition was submitted by Alid Davis and was first considered by the committee in March 2018, having collected 338 signatures. The committee last considered the petition on the 13th of March and agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Education to share the further information provided by the petitioner. A response from the Cabinet Secretary received on the 10th of April. The petitioner has also submitted further comments.
Well, again, I think last time we asked for an advice note to be sent out to head teachers, and I again asked the Cabinet Secretary to send an advice note to head teachers.
Yeah.
And we obviously like to have a copy of it as well, but let's have the advice note sent out, because the advice note does carry an awful lot of power, as people who follow TANS will tell you.
Yes. Yeah. So what we're doing is actually strengthening the situation with regard to the information that is given to the headmasters and with regard to their duties. Then, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah.
So, okay, fine. Port Talbot community against the super prison. The petition was submitted by the Port Talbot Super Prison Protest Group and was first considered by the committee in November 2017, having collected a total of 8,791 signatures. The committee last considered the petition on the 30th of March 2018 and agreed to await the views of the petitioner and at that point to consider writing to the Ministry of Justice. The Welsh Government issued a written statement on justice policy in Wales on the 6th of April. Do we have any comments?
Well, I think things have moved on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there is, we haven't heard from the petitioner what they think of the of what's happened since in terms of the government statement, which I guess they would broadly welcome.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile us reading out that statement, which is the Welsh Government has written to the Secretary of State for Justice to inform him that until a more meaningful dialogue on justice policy with the Welsh Government takes place, we will not facilitate the further development of prisons in Wales. So, do we have any other comments on it before we pass on to...
Only just to say, I think I'm right in saying there's been a public meeting since then at which these points were conveyed, but I don't know if the petition is written into this committee on the back of that.
Okay. So the committee could await the response of the petitioners to the plenary debate on this petition and the recent statement by the Welsh Government before taking further action to the on the petition.
I think that's the sensible thing to do.
Yeah, it's got its own momentum, actually.
Are we happy to allow that? Okay, fine. The next petition under consideration is an urgent appeal for a Welsh Veterans Commissioner for the health and well-being of wounded, injured, sick and homeless veterans. This petition was submitted by Nicola Hester and was first considered by the committee in February 2018, having collected 50 signatures. The committee last considered the petition on the 27th of February and agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Local Government and Public Services. A response was received from the Cabinet Secretary on the 16th of April and a written statement on the subject was issued on the 23rd of April. Do we have any comments?
Chair, I should add that we hadn't received comments or contact from the petitioner when these papers were published last week, but we received contact yesterday. The petitioner apologised, said she'd been away and hadn't been able to turn around the comments, so has asked for the committee to defer this to provide her the opportunity.
Okay, yeah, good.
Yes, are we happy to defer? Fine.
Okay.
Yeah. The next petition is prescription drug dependence and withdrawal, recognition and support. The petition was submitted by Stevie Lewis and was first considered in May 2017, having collected 213 signatures. The committee last considered the petition on the 23rd of January and agreed to invite individuals affected by the issue, health boards, the British Medical Association and the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to provide written evidence on the issues raised and write to the Health and Social Care Committee to ask whether it considered these issues in recent work or intends to in forthcoming inquiries. So we've had a number of responses to that.
Yes, so just to cover briefly, we've had responses from all of the health boards and professional bodies that we've written to. Because of the volume of that, the research service has provided a short paper that's in the packs that just summarises the positions taken by those organisations, and there's some information in this briefing as well. There's a further summary of that. We also invited and received, I think, around 14 comments from individuals affected by this issue, which were too numerous to include in the pack for the meeting, but are published on the website so that people can see those. Clearly, they all indicated a significant issue here that is supported, I think, by and large by the comments received from the professional bodies and the health boards, and the petitioner has also provided her analysis of those responses received as well. So there's a large volume of information in the pack here, and a large volume of evidence that the committee now has on this subject.
Could I just ask a question? Have we had any update from Welsh Government about when the substance misuse plan or strategy framework, there we are, is likely to come out, as we're no longer in April?
No.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
So the committee could consider using the information it's received to produce a detailed letter to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, outlining the evidence received and any recommendations which the committee would wish to make in light of this.
I certainly think, yeah, we have the makings of that, along with a need to ask for an update on the points raised by Susie, that we were actually given a point in time.
Yeah, well,
yesterday.
What I'm thinking is if it's delayed for any reason, there may be some time still to influence it, rather than just complaining that it's late.
Yeah. Okay.
We could potentially undertake both of those actions at the same time. We could make inquiries with the government as to whether there is an imminent publication date for that document or not, whilst at the same time preparing that kind of detailed summary in the form of a letter for the committee to consider at a future meeting.
Could do both. I don't see the problem with that.
Well, shall we suggest that you submit a draft for our consideration? A letter for draft letter. Yeah. Is that okay for our consideration? Yeah.
Okay. And we'll seek that. We'll ask a question of the government as to where that framework is.
Yeah. Right. The next petition is high-speed broadband to Llangeni Village. The petition was submitted by Llangeni Village residents and was first considered by the committee in January 2018, having collected 72 signatures. The committee last considered both petitions. Sorry. This. Right. First petition.
No, I think that's just a mistake.
That's right, okay, fine. Right, okay, thank you. So obviously there's some degree of misunderstanding between the Welsh Government and the deliverers of this, in that one believes it's been delivered and the other believes that
This is us as a committee acting as we all do in our roles as assembly members in our constituencies or regions, and at this point we go back to them and say, listen, you still haven't connected this village.
Exactly.
Will you do it, please, both to Openreach and to Welsh Government?
Yes, absolutely.
And I can say this is a little bit off the beaten track, this particular community, so it needs it pretty quickly, I'd say.
Yes.
Okay. So right back to the government.
Yeah, I think either right to both or to one, copying the other in. Or, no, I think probably to both, isn't it? Asking them to talk to each other and make sure that it's done, because it's hugely frustrating as somebody who's getting connected tomorrow.
Hey, it's lovely when it happens.
And the super fast coverage too.
Village,
it is. Seems very, very strange, this particular one.
I feel their pain.
Yeah.
I think we just do.
So we're happy to do that? Yeah, fine. Okay, male domestic violence victim support services to be independently run and funded is the next petition. This was submitted by Tom Embling and was first considered by the committee in February 2018, having collected 138 signatures. Committee last considered the petition on 30th of March and agreed to write to the Leader of the House to ask what consideration the Welsh Government has given to funding specific support for male victims of domestic violence, and whether there have previously been opportunities for organisations to apply for funding. A response was received from the Leader of the House on the 10th of April, and the petitioner has also provided further comments. Yes. Yeah.
I think, as the petitioner says what the Cabinet Secretary has put sort of reinforces his position, really. I would certainly dispute that the national strategy is inclusive and conscious of the experience of men. From what I can see in this building, also in my constituency office, is the experiences of men are ignored and don't count because men are not able to be victims of domestic abuse, largely. She's not addressed the now recognised discrimination the men face in Wales, with the domestic abuse helpline having been described as sexist, discriminatory by the Commission for Equality. I'd like to have a question and answer session, really. I think we should take some evidence on this, because the domestic abuse of men is a major contributory factor in the massively high rates of suicide in men, and nobody talks about it. And I raised the domestic abuse of males in the chamber, and I was told to get my priorities right. Incredible. You know, if they're commissioning domestic abuse services now, then I think it's the ideal time to maybe put some questions to the Minister. She references the DIN project. The DIN project discriminates against men. I say that quite openly, because it's run by Safer Wales. If you go to Safer Wales as a female, you will not be screened. You'll be treated as a victim, as you should be. If you're male and you go to the DIN project, run by Safer Wales, you will be screened. You'll be treated as a potential perpetrator, which is discriminatory. So there's a huge lack of provision in this area. There's a knock-on effect as well with the South Wales Police. I'm fed up of having people in my constituency office who have been assaulted, but because they're male, they're not treated as victims of domestic abuse, and I have to get in touch with the Chief Superintendent and ask why, and then suddenly they're treated as victims, but there's nowhere to send them, because I wouldn't refer to the DIN project because of the discriminatory practices. The whole area is a mess, and I think it's the duty of this committee to shine a light on this area, really.
Right. Well, we're told the Welsh Government is currently consulting on guidance for commissioning domestic violence services, which will inform how regional services are arranged in the future, and that funding provided directly by the Welsh Government supports the Live Fear Free helpline and Project Dean, which you've mentioned earlier, Neil, to provide information from men and women. The committee could close the petition, but I don't think we're in a position that we would want to be doing that at this moment. But the committee could agree to keep a watching brief on the petition and return to it following the result of the public consultation on guidance for commissioning domestic violence. I think we should call them in and you know, play a role in the consultation, because it'd be good to get some victims of domestic abuse in here, and maybe anonymously, or whether or not they may want to be identified, I don't know, and ask them how they've been treated by the system. If you're male, you are not a victim, more often than not.
An alternative, of course, you know, having talked about how tight things are time-wise, is to get assurances from government that those people that we could bring in here are instead able to give evidence in some sort of public way with a public response from Welsh Government. So we understand exactly where we are. I don't read the situation in the same way as Neil, who says that men aren't able to be victims of domestic abuse, because I hear a debate where it is very much recognised that men can be victims of domestic abuse. Now, do we need to tighten up or improve the way that men who claim to be victims of domestic abuse are given fair treatment? Absolutely. I've no reason to doubt that things need to strengthen, because I've no doubt that a few years ago we were in a situation perhaps where domestic abuse against men wasn't even discussed. But what we need is for those people to be able to, and to feel that they are able to give evidence and to be taken seriously by the consultation that's already ongoing.
And are there organisations, Neil, that would be in a position to engage with that consultation, specifically for men?
Well, the problem is that none get funding. And the other side of the equation, there's a huge industry which gets tens of millions of pounds in Wales, and there is no funding for victims of male domestic abuse. There isn't, in this city, there is no non-judgmental support. And I'll qualify what I said, Trine, because you are right. Of course, men can be victims, but most of the time they're treated as if they're not. And they're told, you know, pull yourself together. If it's so bad, why don't you move out? A 999, a man's been assaulted. Police turn up, they arrest the male. You know, these are the issues that the men have to deal with. I'm actually employing somebody now, a specialist, to deal with the number of cases that I'm getting.
But
whether or not the time
this consultation period, it should allow people to be able to express all those concerns. Is that right? It doesn't preclude those organisations who speak up for men then to be included in this. That the lack of funding would not.
Yeah. Maybe put it on ice and come back to it after the process.
Because we need to be satisfied as a committee, as we would with any issue, that the government is taking concerns that are brought to our attention seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I mention as well, it is possible to take private evidence in sessions like this. We've done it in the Children and Young People's Committee in the last Assembly more than once on very sensitive issues where people are able to give their evidence privately, but their anonymised reporting was used as part of the evidence in our report, and I don't see why evidence of that nature couldn't be made available to the Minister as part of the consultation. But it would be anonymised and the evidence taken privately.
But I think
from individuals.
The difficulty would be for this committee the timescale for that. The consultation, we understand, is open until the 22nd of June. So that I think the difficulty in doing that and feeding it in, us doing it. So I think perhaps.
Chair, can I suggest that we maybe agenda it for the autumn in that case, and see what the consultation looks like, what the results are, and then maybe get some evidence in the next term. I think probably one of the cruelest forms of domestic abuse, which certainly is not recognised, is the withdrawal of contact with one's children. And you know, it's an action of coercive control, but it is not yet regulated by the new legislation. And yeah, that's a dimension which could be explored as well.
I was going to say, I think there's two things we need to do. I'd be very concerned if we became a consultee in anything. I think that the role of a Petitions Committee is become a consultee, because if we start doing that, we're going to be bogged down by being a consultee. Let the consultation take place. Let's urge everybody who's written to us to take part in that consultation. And after the 22nd of June, when the consultation ends, the government will come up with something probably in the autumn. We'll see what they come up with. We decide whether we're going to do anything then.
And also seek assurances from government about the way that they will deal with the issue of male domestic abuse as part of that.
So are you saying we write a letter to that effect?
Yeah.
That we should write a letter to that. Right. Are you happy?
That they should actively seek out people to take part in the consultation, and not just wait for people to get in touch, and to report back to us on how they have addressed the issue of male domestic abuse as a part of the consultation.
Would you like to see a draft of the letter before it goes out?
Just include the discrimination aspect, because they've completely ignored the fact that they've been found to be discriminatory.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. We have to move on, but would you like to see a draft of the letter before it goes out? Yeah, fine. Thank you. Okay. All right. The next petition is we need Welsh Government funding for play. The petition was submitted by Ray Ceredigion and was first considered in March 2018, having collected 328 signatures online. The committee last considered the petition on the 6th of February. A response from the Minister for Children and Social Care was received on the 13th of April, and a response from HCSC committee was received on the 20th of April.
Will they have answers from the Minister? Well, let them come back and see what they think of it. They're either happy or they're not happy, and if they're not happy, we see what we decide to do.
Okay. Are we happy to do that? Yep. In the first instance, right. So the committee could await the views of the petitioners on the answer provided by the Minister for Children and Social Care before considering further action. We're happy with that. The next, and I believe this is the last of for the petitions is Towin Memorial Hospital X-ray and Minor Injuries Unit petition. The petition was submitted by Towin and District Healthcare Action Group and was first considered by the committee in May 2013. Having collected 4,486 signatures, it was closed by the committee in March 2017. But there have been some issues with regard to what the board had agreed to do. I believe that it has, in fact, now complied with the desires of the petitioners, and so this is simply a matter to note the correspondence. Yeah. Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Fine, thank you.
Should we bring the minister in? Should we bring the minister in?
Yes, I think so. The next, of course, now is the evidence session, and this is with regard to recognition of parental alienation. Morning. Loretta. Okay. Right. Good morning, Burrada, to the Cabinet Minister. Can I ask you, in the first instance, to introduce your officials to us for the record?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to you and all your members. To my right, we have Nigel Brown, the Chief Executive of CAFCAS, and to my left, Albert Heaney, my lead official, covering the whole gambit of my role with social care, but also interestingly as well, the chair of the Family Justice Network as well, and has been for some time. So between us, hopefully we'll be able to add some value to the committee's deliberations.
Fine. So as a brief background to this session, the committee has been considering this petition since May 2017 and has previously considered several items of correspondence from the Welsh Government. As you will be aware, the committee took evidence from the petitioners on the 23rd of January and subsequently agreed to invite you to also attend an evidence session. The committee has also written to a number of organisations to seek their views on the subject matter of the petition, and these were published last week as part of the papers to this meeting. We had a considerable response from different organisations involved, as you could well imagine. So, as you know, the format of these evidence sessions is that we will be questioning you. I will open that questioning, and then my colleagues will follow on with subsequent questions. You're happy with that format? Fine, thank you. So if I open by saying, what is the position of the Welsh Government and CAFCAS Cymru on formally recognising the term parental alienation and the actions associated with it? And can you expand on the Welsh Government's current position with regard to that definition?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity here today and to expand on our position. And I'm sure Nigel will come in a moment and add a CAFCAS perspective as well. From a Welsh Government perspective, we do recognise that some parents can behave in a way that alienates the other parent from their child's life, and that these behaviours can have a significant adverse impact on the emotional well-being of the child. But, and this is key, the child should always be at the forefront, at the centre of our concerns. We fully support the principle that a child should be entitled to a meaningful relationship with both parents following family separation where it is safe and where it is in the child's best interest. In respect of parental alienation and the debate around this topic of parental alienation, we prefer in Welsh Government to refer to parental alienation not as a syndrome, a condition, a classification, a label, but actually as alienating behaviours which can be demonstrated and which can be evidenced as well by frontline practitioners when looking at individual cases. The most important issue for us as a Welsh Government is that these behaviours, when they occur, are appropriately dealt with using the existing regulatory and legal framework. And interestingly, the Family Justice Network, which as I mentioned, Albert chairs, which includes, I have to say, all of the key stakeholders within the family justice system in Wales, it looked at its position on parental alienation back in March 2017. And the network recognised that the behaviours described they can have a significant impact on the emotional well-being of the child in individual circumstances. But those same network members of the Family Justice Network agreed that under existing legislation, the Family Court already has sufficient range of powers to deal with the cases where these alienating behaviours exist, and where appropriate, cases can and indeed have been considered by Welsh local authorities under child protection procedures. So on that basis, the network's view remains unchanged in that parental alienation should continue to be dealt with under the existing legal provisions. And just finally, before asking Nigel if he's got anything to add, our view clearly, from what I'm saying, is that the existing regulatory and legal framework does contain the provisions to deal effectively with these behaviours, and the Family Court's primary concern when making decision is always focused on, and this is the critical thing, the welfare of the child. I hope that helps in laying out the government's position.
Yes, thank you very much. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just simply to add on to that, you know, as a social work profession, Cafcass Cymru is very familiar with working with families where there are a range of behaviours and where adults behave in a way that can alienate a child, perhaps from another family member or even from the extended family, is very common. It's what we are used to doing and what the social work profession is used to working with within the context of its services it provides to children and families.
Right. So can I, for absolute clarification, are you saying, Cabinet Minister, that the framework remains exactly the same? There is no change to this framework envisaged?
Yeah, the framework is robust and covers, and we may want to turn to this in some detail, which I'm happy to, but the framework is robust and covers the spectrum of alienating behaviours. It can encompass it already. One of the things that we might want to turn to is how practice develops within that framework to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And that is quite an interesting debate.
Well, the concerns obviously raised by this petition is that in some way that framework has been failing. But obviously we will carry on with question on that basis. But that is the whole idea of this petition, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Chair, and I recognise that. But as I say, it isn't simply me as a minister saying this or Cafcass saying this, but actually the family network as well is saying with one voice, it is adequate to the it's more than adequate to the task. It's actually robust, and it's underpinned very well both from a high-level statutory basis, but also in terms of codes of practice and guidance that is given to family courts and frontline social workers as well.
Okay, Albert.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, committee. Family Justice Network, chaired the Family Justice Network from 2013. Family Justice Network is a wide range of expertise, critical stakeholders. First considered parental alienation actually back in November 2013 and revisited then in March, quite correctly as the Minister has explained, in 2017. Family Justice Network, in its considered view, is clear that the current legislative framework is coping well. It's the right type of legislation. The new Social Service and Wellbeing Wales legislation places duties, responsibilities, and so therefore from the expertise of the Family Justice Network and those critical stakeholders around family justice, they haven't and wouldn't describe the legislation in place as failing. Obviously, as the Minister explains, what we're always trying to do in Wales is make sure we have the best possible practice and support children and safeguard children in the best possible way.
Good morning and welcome to the committee this morning. The difference in opinion between Cafcass in Wales and in England is something which is going to draw some attention. People would expect Cafcass in Wales and Cafcass England perhaps to take the same view, as you are similar bodies who I suspect take your evidence from the same types of sources. Can we just look at why you think there might be a difference between Cafcass in Wales and in England, and in relation to the basics of what we're discussing?
Diolch, Rhyn, am a question.
Thank you, Rhyn, for the question.
It may surprise committee members to know that actually there's a huge degree of joint working and collaboration between Cafcass England and Cafcass Wales. Yeah. And what has been in some ways portrayed as a difference of opinion in this publicly, I suspect is somewhat narrower. I think both Cafcass England and Cafcass Wales recognise, as the Welsh Government does, that alienating behaviours can have an impact on a child's welfare and well-being, without a doubt. The way in which we actually proceed to improve best practice around it is a matter of interest and discussion amongst the two Cafcass bodies. But Nigel, if I can bring Nigel in, because they're engaged in dialogue weekly, on this basis.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to this. I think we do work very closely with Cafcass in England. I don't think that there is a difference between what we are saying. Certainly, in my discussions with the Chief Executive there, he's of the view that the current legislation and regulations is absolutely ample and sufficient to respond to this. He's of the view that there is no need for a new framework to be brought in. As an organisation, they are, as we are, continually looking to review practice and to look at the guidance and support that we provide for our practitioners. And so we continue to have ongoing dialogue with them to make sure that our approach and theirs is informed by the same underlying professional principles that we operate within. So I think that, my understanding of what Cafcass England have said does reflect our position in Wales.
So when we hear a chartered psychologist telling us Cafcass in England says it now recognises parental alienation, Cafcass Cymru has not, do you think it's that clear cut?
I don't know where that person has got that information.
And so when in written evidence to us, Cafcass England say it is appropriate to call parental alienation emotional abuse. Are you happy with those definitions?
I think it's understanding the context of what we are responding to here. So adults who behave in a way that alienates a child from another parent can be simply in terms of saying, they're not very nice to you, they don't love you, to actually trying to block or damage contact between them, to actually fabricating information and making allegations to destroy or damage that relationship. So there's a continuum on what we do here.
So it can be abuse rather than is abuse.
Yes, and I think it's a difference in emphasis, Rhyn, because we acknowledge, Welsh Government, Cafcass acknowledges, that where you have, particularly on the extreme end of that spectrum, because it can range from minor conversations with parents, with children, to something much more deliberate and purposeful behind it. There's quite a spectrum of this. But we recognise, as does Cafcass England, that those alienating behaviours can, in extreme circumstances, lead to damage to the child's well-being, which can amount to, yes, abuse. But it's an issue of emphasis here. What we don't recognise within Welsh Government and within Cafcass as well and within the family network is that this is a condition, a syndrome and so on. It's more to do with identify the behaviours and then respond appropriately.
Yeah, and in researching it, it's a relatively new area of study, and I've noted in the research that I've done that we've moved from the definition of it as a syndrome you know, that's where it started, and now we've moved some way away from that. Is there enough of a level of understanding amongst professionals about what parental alienation is, or what it potentially can be, and is there a level of understanding amongst the general public?
Let me deal with the first one first, amongst professionals. I would say undoubtedly yes. And some of there is a constant process of ongoing practice review, which ties into continuing professional development within social workers, but also within the family courts. But we've also, in some ways, been at the forefront here in Wales of reviewing what the evidence says, as opposed to anecdote, where the evidence lies. And if you haven't had it already, I draw the committee's attention to this, which was commissioned by CAFCAS, produced in April 2018. I think it's the most thorough research that I've seen. This was my bedtime reading as well over the last few weeks. The review of research on case law and parental alienation. It goes into not just the academic, but the weight of evidence around what this concept means, how it should be dealt with, how it is dealt with in family court system as well. And it is really authoritative. And it comes very much down on that side, that this is a question of devising the best practice to deal where there are examples of alienating behaviour, as opposed to rehashing arguments over whether this is a syndrome or a condition and so on. It's very much on that child-by-child, case-by-case basis.
And in terms of the public's understanding of what parental alienation is or can be, there's a suggestion from the petitioner that there should be an education programme. Written evidence we've taken is split on that. Where do you stand?
Yes, certainly. I think that what we're talking about here are parenting behaviours, and I think that Welsh Government has invested significantly in promoting positive parenting. And CAFCAS, we have been working with colleagues to look at how that information that we have in terms of that helps parents when they are separating, how they can do that in a way that enables them to remain focused upon the interests of the child, not their own adult interests. And we're looking to make that available through the partnerships across all the local authorities in Wales, which will give parents an opportunity to put themselves in the shoes of their child when they are separating. So I think that there's already a lot of information out there. There can always be more information. We can always make it more accessible. And that is one of the things that we are looking at in terms of how that information can be more readily available to families that support them. I think that, we talk about parental alienation here, but there are a range of behaviours that have an impact upon the well-being of children. And I think that it's about making sure that we look at the whole child, not just elements of the child's well-being.
Okay, Albert, come in. We're mindful of the time, so we have to move on through the questions, but by all means, Albert.
Very, very concise then.
Yeah.
In relation to the first issue, discussions that we've had with the Association of Directors of Social Services Cymru and Heads of Children's Services, they're certainly providing us with assurances that where local authorities see it falling into the range of child protection, they are dealing with those, but in the majority of cases, in the vast majority, it's at a much lower tier. So important to reference that, but being picked up in the current system and dealt with within the current system. Social workers built upon assessment and professional judgment. The second issue around the Welsh Government's approach, I think it's really important that the positive parenting emphasis continues. That gets us into a very healthy, constructive dialogue of what good looks like and what can be helpful for parents at a very difficult time in their particular lives.
There's just one overarching thing that I'd like to clear, if I can. There are two descriptions of this parental alienation. It's implacable hostility is the other phrase used. What's the juxtaposition between those two as far as you're concerned? Because it's very important, really, that we know.
Implacable hostility is a phrase that the courts have adopted and the courts use.
Yes, right. Okay, and Neil, did you want to come in quickly on that?
I just wondered what you meant by lower tier, really.
I think social work professionals are always trying to assess the needs of a child and the support for families. Sometimes that can be dealt with in softer interventions. It can be talking therapies. It can be understanding the resilience of the family. Sometimes we know from literature that separation divorce and the pressures of that can lead to real stress for parents, and sometimes the healing process of time and taking the correct steps and actions. So what I mean by lower tier is really sometimes there are softer interventions that can be most enabling and supporting to parents at a very difficult time.
Okay, thank you. Susie, would you like?
Yes. I find this really interesting. I've got to explain it's a good 20 years since I was involved in this kind of work professionally. But what I can say is that at that time, family lawyers, CAFCAS and social workers were quite aware that parents were more than capable of deliberately alienating their children from former partners, doing it unconsciously, and sometimes, of course, were accused of it when they weren't doing it. So I think sort of that level of understanding has always been there. The difficulty at that time, and I wonder if you can tell me what's changed, is there just weren't enough people and enough time to carry out all the observations that were necessary in order to persuade a court one way or the other. So my question is, you've explained that the current framework is robust, even. Are we still in those situations where judges are sitting there saying, I've got a CAFCAS report here where an officer's only been to see this child in one setting rather than more than one setting? Is the problem still resources rather than the law?
Certainly that's not a message that's coming back to myself when I meet with the judiciary in Wales. I meet regularly with the judges, both at the local level and at the national level. As an organisation, whilst we had to respond to a significant increase in workload, our priority has been to make sure that we do see the child and are able to provide the court with a rounded picture as much as possible of that child's circumstances. And I think that, you know, as the Minister's already said, our priority is to put the child first. I'm certainly not aware that there is a fundamental issue in terms of guardians not seeing children enough in order to be able to provide the court with the information that they need.
Okay, so why do you think this particular petition was able to be constructed and brought to us today if things are going so well?
I think this has been a hot topic for a while, both here and at the Westminster Parliament, and there are, you know, significant voices adding to the clamour around this, and we welcome that, by the way, because it helps us refine our thinking around issues of parental alienation and how we deal with this, the responses to this. But our focus will continue very much to be on how do you use the current best practice and also the legislative framework we have to get the right outcomes for the child. And where appropriate, you know, in respect of UNHCR as well, which does actually say, you know, it balances the needs of the child against the needs of the child to be with the family and with both parents ideally, as long as it's in the safe interest of the child. So I keep coming back to that. But we do have quite a robust system here now within Wales. So CAFCAS recently went through a series of training with its own advisors on this. We do, of course, have the family courts and the advisors and the children's guardian system as well, which can give good, robust, independent advice. Frontline social workers, I think that's what's moved on now over the last few years as well. Their awareness of this as well, but more importantly than the awareness of it as a headline issue, of actually how to work their way through this and how to deal with this. And of course, senior supervision around social workers as well. And part of that ties into what I referred to earlier on about the continuing professional development. So this now provides part of the continuing professional education and learning framework for those social workers as well. So it's quite robust, but it's focused on that issue all the time of making the right decisions within the existing framework.
Okay, well, I won't take this much further, but I still need to pin you down on this. If everything is in order, why is this petition in front of us? Because even though things may have improved, and I'm obviously very glad to hear that, somebody somewhere still felt that it's enough of an issue to bring this forward to this place. Somebody somewhere is not happy yet.
And I think not simply these petitioners, but the wider petitioners around the UK have also moved on position as well over the last few years. So at one time there was very much a demand to have this described as a syndrome, a condition, a classification. Yeah. It's moved actually from there even with them. Yeah. And I think their focus is increasingly shifted on to, right, how do we recognise that there is indeed a situation on that broad spectrum that Nigel was describing, where parental alienation can damage the well-being of a child. Now, we're absolutely on the same territory. I think where we differ from them is that the focus needs to be retained on that. How do we deliver this through the existing framework, which is actually what the Family Justice Network are saying as well, and that they feel that's the appropriate way to do it. Things like the Cascade report help us in terms of frontline professionals and refining best practice, so we're doing that as well. So I suspect we may be trying to get the same outcome, but what we're saying is we're working to do it already.
Okay, so no need for no new duties where it's coming to?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fine, thank you. Neil.
Yeah, thanks. I'll declare an interest. I've had far too many dealings with CAFCAS over the years. My constituency office is rammed with parents, so much so that I've employed somebody to deal with these issues now because I need a level of expertise. I feel that Wales is light years behind England. What I see in my constituency office is a system in chaos, a system where alienation isn't actually recognised. I noticed that you said that the first time that you looked at this was in 2013, is that correct?
Yes.
Well,
the Family Justice Network looked at it in November 2013. When
was the Family Justice Network set up then?
It would have been set up. I joined the Welsh Government in February 2013, and I believe it had just been set up just before that point.
Because the courts have recognised parental alienation since 1983 with case law, and I'm glad that you did recognise that it exists. So I think that's a real positive, because not everybody in Wales seems to recognise that. So that's a positive. In terms of recognising things that are a problem, would you agree that domestic abuse is also a problem?
Yes, it's why Welsh Government and partners on the ground put so much resource into domestic abuse.
Correct.
It is an issue in Wales.
So we established that. So parental alienation is an issue, correct? Domestic abuse is an issue. So can you explain the difference in approach there from CAFCAS Wales with what you do with domestic abuse, which is great, by the way, and what you do with parental alienation, which is not a great deal? Can you explain the difference? And maybe outline for the committee and outline for the public watching.
It may be helpful if you can explain what you see as the differences, because we have strategies in place appropriate to domestic abuse and strategies in place appropriate to dealing with the wide issues that can affect a child's well-being when they go through family schools.
Well, not really, because as you should know with domestic abuse, you've got the issue of coercive control, and then there's a whole training programme with that. There's a training programme with domestic abuse. What training programme do you have with parental alienation?
We can do, happy to do that, and it relates to some of the matters that we've touched on already, but there is the CPL framework, which includes those wide range of issues of safeguarding and protection of the child. That's in place already.
Just to be clear, what training are individual social workers given specifically in parental alienation?
I think you need to look broader than just team parental alienation to alienation and to parent.
We're here to discuss parental alienation. With respect, you've recognised it's a problem. You've recognised that domestic abuse is a problem, which is being addressed, great, through your training programmes, brilliant. Why are you not addressing parental alienation? Don't go wider. We're here to discuss parental alienation. Why are you not going wide? Why are you not specifically dealing with that issue?
Well, we are dealing with the issue. We've commissioned Cardiff University to undertake a review for us of current legislation, of case law, which is very relevant to what we are doing.
So what training right now, today, what training have individual CAFCAS workers on the front line got in parental alienation?
Okay. If I can continue, the research that we have done has been discussed, shared and debated with practitioner forums across the organisation. We have got a group of practitioners together to look at developing, as part of our new approach, which will focus much greater upon outcomes for children, our pathway for not just parental alienation but domestic abuse and high conflict pathways. We have raised this with individual practitioners who have continued to work in these situations and receive one-to-one supervision on a bi-monthly basis with line managers to discuss individual cases. Team meetings and workshops have been held across the organisation to raise awareness of this. But this is an ongoing process. It's not something that suddenly starts and finishes. We have an ongoing training programme, and as our understanding of issues around parental alienation and other areas develop, and so we will refresh that and make sure that the workforce are kept up to date with the most recent understanding.
So what this is really important. What percentage of CAS frontline officers assessing children have had training in parental alienation up to this date? What percentage?
I can't give you a percentage today, sorry. What I can say to you, though, is that that training is available to all the staff and will continue to be made available to all staff as we roll out this new approach as well.
Yes.
So how many staff have taken up the training? Will you be able to tell the committee in writing after today what percentage of staff have done this training?
I think that it depends what you mean by training.
All staff.
What we're saying to you is that all staff have been exposed to conversations, debates and professional challenge around this issue of parental alienation.
It's not the same as specific training as you have with domestic abuse, though, is it?
Well, I think that what we have got in place is a range of ways of educating and supporting people to professionally develop.
Do you agree that parental alienation can be properly called emotional abuse?
As I've already said, I think to the first question, there's a range of behaviours that account for alienating behaviours, and I think that there are behaviours which quite rightly can have an emotional effect upon abusing the child.
So all practitioners now, this is important. Just finally, all practitioners now are having training on how to recognise alienating behaviours. All practitioners, as in England.
Yes, in terms of England, the new approach that we will be rolling out, as England are, is that we will do exactly the same as them. They're looking to adopt a new framework over the course of this year, and as part of that, they will be training all their staff to deliver that, and we will be doing the same.
So, Neil, the Learning Development Plan for 2018-19, in recognition of the issue and the debate around implacable hostility alienation, will be taken forward as practice together, but it will be in a child-centred and evidence-based manner. So the current knowledge, which we are not short of, I have to say, in terms of parental alienation and how that can impact on the child's well-being, that is being worked into the practice, not only for CAFCAS, but also for social workers as well. If you're looking for a definable module that says, here's where we do purely parental alienation, as opposed to the wider complexity of behaviours that can impact on a child, then maybe we can come back to you at some point as we refine this evolving area of practice.
Do you do specific models on domestic?
Now, Albert may want to put. Did you want to say something?
I know the time's going on. I was just going to purely add, because Nigel quite correctly is highlighting around CAFCAS staff and the expertise that CAFCAS staff have in their daily duties. I just wanted to reference that for children's social workers, there is already rigorous safeguarding training, child protection training in place, statutory regional safeguarding boards. It's a very complex arena, safeguarding, and just rely heavily upon assessment, but also that professional judgment. And I think for the professionals working in the field, I know that they take these matters extremely seriously indeed.
If the professionals are not being trained specifically in parental alienation, with modules in parental alienation like they have in domestic abuse, then what is happening when you get to court is that the emotional abuse is not being recognised, it's not being reported, and it's not being quantified. And therein lies a problem in Wales. I'm delighted to read this and how well England are going to do.
Right, Susie, did you just want to come on this?
Obviously, Social Care Wales is overseeing the development of the qualifications for new social workers now. Bearing in mind what you just said, you may have answered my question really. Parental alienation will form part of a wider module, shall we say, that could be included in those on those new qualifications. Would that be fair?
Well, certainly in terms of social work training, safeguarding, child development, alienating behaviours are part of that training. What we will do is only have continuing ongoing conversations with Social Care Wales to ensure then the delivery of our training work. And I did mention again the regional safeguarding boards, because indeed there's been some detailed conversations through the heads of children's services and the Association of Director of Social Services specifically on these issues. Yes, indeed.
Lovely. Thank
exactly.
You. Thank you, Chair.
Just come back, Neil.
Can you tell me what systems and protocols are in place with staff of CAFCAS Cymru to have due regard to Articles 9 and 18 of the UN CRC, the United Nations Charter for the Rights of the Child, that protect against the impact of parental alienation? What systems, what protocols do you have in place? What formalised systems and protocols are there?
I think there's two things I'd like to respond to on that. The first is around the assessment tools that we've got developed, which are have been developed in conjunction with a professor of psychology, which builds upon the voice of the child, making sure the child is at the heart of what we do, and builds upon the Convention for the Rights of Children. Our aim, our purpose is to make sure the voice of the child is represented in the courts arena, and all our guidance places the child central to what we do. If I can just come back to the point in terms of the evidence for that is, during the course of the year, over the last year, we dealt with over 2,600 applications for private law. Of those 1,600, we were instructed by the court to do further work on post that first hearing. And of that 1,600, the court determined that there were 206 cases which were complex and required the appointment of a guardian and a solicitor to independently represent those children. These are the most complex cases. These are the cases where you would anticipate the behaviours that we are talking about today at the extreme end would be present, alongside a range of safeguarding issues and a level of high parental conflict. So we did a sample of that 206 because, as an organisation, it's about looking at the quality of the work and whether the effectiveness of the training that we're delivering is working. So of that 206, we looked at a sample of 25 of those. And out of that 25, there were 3 cases where parental alienation was the key issue. When we looked at those cases, which are now all closed, we were satisfied that those issues had been identified at an early stage, had been reported to the court had made appropriate actions in respect of those, and that where it was relevant, the local authorities had been involved in those cases. So in terms of looking at the impact of what we're doing and making sure that children are central to our work, we are confident that when we do deep dives in terms of the practice, that our practice is child-focused, and it is making sure that the voice of the child is heard.
I hear what you're saying.
Very specific now.
You've not identified any system, you've not identified any protocol. The point you're missing is you talk about the voice of the child. The child has no choice. Because the whole point of alienation is the real voice of the child is removed by abusive behaviour. And that's the whole point of what we're discussing today. And unfortunately, I think England seemed to be getting it right, and we're some way behind. How do you explain the differences between what the English are doing and what...
Can you describe what you see as being the differences?
Well, for example, the whole approach, it's recognised, that there's training in place, guidance on how to recognise alienating behaviours, particular pathways with alienation. So why is there such a difference?
So if we look at difference, Wales was the first country to actually put in place in its law recognising the UNCRC as part of its domestic law. Indeed, and we were absolutely ahead of the game. Within that, it means that those different balances between Article 9, where children should retain contact with both parents unless doing so would cause them further harm.
Why the difference, though, Minister?
I'm trying to explain.
Why the difference between Kafka's Cymru and Kafka's England?
I'll try and explain. The balance between Article 19, the rights of the children to be kept safe from harm, and Article 3, protection of the best interests of the child. Now, in courts, child welfare is the prime consideration. It's the prime consideration. So procedures and guidance which flows from the Act that we have in place and such things as the All Wales Child Protection Procedures have a wide definition of emotional abuse already, and that is translated into frontline practice, not only in the courts, but in social care. So I would take issue with the fact that England is doing things remarkably different or remarkably better, because actually the acknowledgement of where the Families Court network is and others is that we are doing the right thing in Wales, Neil.
Right, I think
you need to speak to more people.
Well, we'll speak... okay.
Neil, I think we have to move on now. Mike, would you...
Well, you've said it's very similar between Wales and England, the Kafkas. I am told that Kafkas England has developed a new private law assessment pathway, including a child conflict pathway and a parental alienation pathway, which sit alongside the domestic abuse pathway. There's also a positive parenting programme. Are these either happening in Wales or going to happen in Wales?
Yeah, I'll just touch on the positive parenting programme. That's a massive part of the Welsh Government programme, and it's well resourced as well. And we've been doing this for some time, as you know, the whole approach towards positive parenting. But if I can turn to Nigel.
we're working alongside Cafcass Cymru. So in terms of the pilot of the child impact analysis, we were one of the 3 areas that, 2 in England, 1 in Wales. We've piloted that already. In terms of the pathways, we are in the same stage as England. They are in the process where they're drafting those guidance. They are refining them and going out for consultation for the rest of this year. We have got a project board set up, chaired by the Deputy Chief Executive, that is looking at developing the same approach. Obviously, we will want to have the Welsh context in terms of the different pieces of legislation we've got here, and to make sure that our approach reflects the agenda within Wales. But certainly, the 3 pathways we've set out there, they will be incorporated into our approach, and there will be training delivered across the whole of the organisation before that's rolled out.
If England are going out to consultation this year, when are you going out to consultation?
When I say they're going for consultation, it's not formal consultation as government go for consultation.
I thought so. I was only quoting your words back to you.
Yeah, certainly, absolutely fine. During the course of this year, we will be engaging with stakeholders. So, for example, in the summer of this year, we will be engaging with our advisory committee, which have got representations from across the sector, to share our initial thoughts with them and for them to have an opportunity to challenge and to shape that approach.
So will we be within a month or so of England in actually doing it? I don't think we'll do it on the same time, if only because everything will have to be translated. But will we, if England are finished theirs by November, will we be ready by January, for example? Will we be in a month or 2 of England?
Absolutely. What I would want to stress here, that this is not something that we're not already doing. This is already part of our day work. What we are looking at is listening to what young people have told us about their experiences of the court and refining it. So I wouldn't want members feeling that at the moment there's nothing in place. It is in place. But you are absolutely right. Our plan is to be able to launch this roughly along the same timeline as Cafcass in England are looking to do.
Who are the stakeholders?
Stakeholders will be local authorities, the third sector, representative groups of parents involved in family private proceedings.
Which groups in the third sector? Because the problem we have in Wales, the third sector is dominated by a particular ideology.
I'm sorry, Neil, we can't actually explore that line of questioning. So, Neil, would you like to carry on?
Yeah, the Cabinet Secretary, Community and Children, your predecessor, stated in correspondence to the committee the information on a number of cases where implacable hostility features is not available. Are you going to attempt to collect that data? Because we don't know whether we're dealing with a tiny problem or we're dealing with a major problem, and different people have different views and different people have different caseloads on it. I mean, mine is 1 or 2 a year. I think that Neil's indicated his is substantially more than that.
Okay. Well, we certainly, there's a range of data that Cafcass collects, but Nigel, and you also do deep dives into information as well to look at it, because Nigel has already indicated that the number of cases where this features, where it is of this extreme nature, actually narrowed down quite a lot. So, but if I can turn to you.
Yeah, certainly. If I can pick up on one of your earlier points in terms of representation from constituents, I think it needs to be noted that the decision of the government to remove legal aid for families has had a huge impact upon people representing themselves in private law proceedings and feeling completely bewildered by the process of what happens in court. So I think it's very understandable that many people would be seeking support, representation and advice from a range of forums when they are embarking upon private law matters. It has a huge impact on the court. In terms of the data, we again over the past 18 months have been refreshing and renewing our data set, working with our advisory committee and with representatives from there to make sure that the data that we collect kind of reflects the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Social Services Wellbeing Wales Act and can add value to our understanding of what happens in court. So we gather a lot of information. We don't gather information to the level of detail that you've just suggested in terms of the different kinds of behaviours or issues that feature in case at that level. But what we do is we do deep dives. So as I've just described, we will look at a sample of cases and understand what are the key issues within that, both to assure us about the quality of the service that we are providing, but also to identify learning and development that as an organisation we need to be facilitating for our staff to help us make sure that we are best able to respond to the issues and challenges that we deal with in court.
So, in summary, you're not going to collect that data?
Not at that level.
Fine. Thank you, Mike. First of all, can I make an overarching comment? It appears to me that the current frameworks place a great reliance on the family court system. Now, given the considerable concern that I have from client cases that I deal with the family court system, and as a former JP, I'm not sure that putting such a reliance on the family court system is the best way to go forward with this. And I think you ought to take those comments into consideration quite seriously. I'd like to now thank the Cabinet Minister for his time and for your comprehensive answers to the questions answered, some of which may have placated some of us, but maybe not others. But I'd like to explain that we will now discuss, obviously, the evidence that we've heard in committee after this session, and we'd like to just note that a copy of the transcript will be sent for you to check for factual inaccuracies or accuracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Folio.
I propose, in accordance with Standing Order 17.42, that the committee resolves to meet in private for the remainder of today's meeting. Are we content?